I'm going to start promptly. Great. Good evening. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here at René Cassin this evening. My name's Esther. I am the campaigns manager at René Cassin, the Jewish Voice for Human Rights, and it's my absolute pleasure to be facilitating this evening's panel on missing migrant children, lessons from the Kindertransport. A few small pieces of housekeeping before I continue. Firstly, as you have probably just heard, this event is being recorded. Panelists are all visible, but participants, you are not, your cameras are not visible. Questions are absolutely welcome. And the last 15-20 minutes or so will be reserved for just this. So please do use the Q&A function as well as the chat, which are being monitored by our wonderful director throughout the event. So this evening, we will hear from our wonderful speakers on a moving and a profoundly important subject, the experience and ordeal of migrant children, both in this century and in the last, from the Kindertransport in the 1930s to the alarming mistreatment of migrant children today. As a Jewish charity, we remind this government of their failure to learn from history and of the damage that their hostile environment has inflicted as a result. So before I introduce our wonderful speakers and hand over to them, I'm going to give a brief background on sort of why we came to want to hold this event. Last month, it was revealed that 222 asylum-seeking children had gone missing on the Home Office's watch, dozens kidnapped from a hotel in Brighton, and most likely trafficked for criminal exploitation. Just today, The Guardian reported that lawyers from the Home Secretary disclosed 66 unaccompanied asylum-seeking children remain missing from just one local authority, Brighton and Hove, after disappearing from a hotel there. Now looking back, between November 1938 and September 1939, the UK's Kindertransport scheme helped 10,000 Jewish children travel to Britain and escape the Holocaust. A voluntary scheme led by organizations including the Central British Fund for German Jewry, now known by many of you as World Jewish Relief, welcomed fleeing children and oversaw their welfare. Our lovely speaker and colleague, Deborah Singer, the daughter of Hannah, who came over on the Kindertransport, has posed the following question, which you can also find in a Metro article published yesterday. If, during a world war, using paper records, one small charity could keep track of thousands of child refugees, why has the Home Office, with the available digital resources of today, lost contact with over 200 vulnerable children seeking asylum? To help us unpack these questions and explore the parallels between then and now are our wonderful panel, who I'm going to introduce now. First, Deborah Singer, MBE. Deborah is a member of the René Cassin team and leads on the campaign to safeguard the Human Rights Act and the European Convention on Human Rights in the UK. Her background is in policy and campaigning for the rights of women seeking asylum. And in 2012, she was awarded an MBE for her services to women. Her mother and uncle fled Nazi Germany on the Kindertransport. We're then going to hear from the wonderful Lauren Starkey. Lauren is an independent specialist social worker for young people who've experienced trafficking and exploitation. She spent the last 3 years at Love 146 UK, supporting child trafficking survivors to rebuild their lives and campaigning to end this extreme form of abuse once and for all. She's also volunteering with the Sprecher program, a community organization supporting the resettlement and integration of the Albanian community. Last but certainly not least is Janine Walker. Janine recently joined the Good Law Project after being at Safe Passage International, where she led the legal team. She is currently working with the children's rights charity Article 39 on raising the funds for a legal challenge to the Home Office's dangerous practice of housing unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in unregulated hotels. Janine has also practiced as an asylum and immigration solicitor at Wilson Solicitors LLP, including working with unaccompanied minors. Now, without further ado, and without boring you with any more of my speeches, I'm going to hand over to our first wonderful speaker, Deborah.
Hello, everyone, and it was really encouraging to see the numbers going up. We've got 80 people here, so that's amazing. So what I'm going to do really is present a case study about my mother and my uncle. And to give you a sense of the sort of information that was kept on them all that time ago during the war. And the files that I'm going to show you come from, as Esther said, the Central British Fund for German Jewry, which is now World Jewish Relief. And they kept files of thousands of children, and and much later they digitized these files and they gave them back to the people they were about. So they actually gave my mother her files, and I'm going to show you a short film which is when they gave her file, they made this film. So we'll see that now.
I'm getting, sorry, I'm getting a message that we can't hear. So I'm just gonna make sure that that's sorted out. Just give me 1 minute, sorry. Obviously you practice these things plenty of times and then when it actually happens, it never works. So I'm just gonna make sure that works, hold on. Okay, I'm gonna stop share and I'm gonna share again. Right, it's not letting me share sound. Sorry, everyone.
Esther, it is subtitled, so maybe we can make do with that version.
Sure, let me just give it one more go and then we'll see from there. Okay, I think this time, let me know if it works this time.
My brother Gerald and I got onto the Kindertransport. My mother had a friend in England who helped us sort of expedite things and move them on. And it was only much later when I visited Germany again that I heard that apparently there had been some delay and our tickets only just arrived in time. And my mother must have been very worried whether we'd actually get onto the train or not.
Everyone who came into the country that we helped was given one of these cards, and then after that there's a more detailed file which explains everything that World Jewish Relief did to help.
The girl seems perfectly satisfied with her surroundings. Yes, she was.
Girl being you?
Girl being me, yes. It's a reminder of all sorts of things. It's such a tribute, I think, to our parents. And, you know, I'm very grateful. I really am very grateful that I was given the opportunity to have them.
So after that moving film, I'm going to tell you a bit more about how my mum and my uncle and the family, what happened to them during the war, and then I'm going to show you the actual files. So this is Hannah when she was a little girl. She's about 10, this picture, and they were a sort of middle-class Jewish family in Germany, and as things got worse, and once Kristallnacht had happened, they realized they had to get out, and our grandmother wrote to the friend of hers that Hannah mentions in the film and asked her to help. So this is her twin brother, so also 10, Hans. Once he was in England as an adult, he changed his name to Gerald to sound more English, but at this stage he's still called Hans. So Hannah and Hans came on the Kindertransport when they were 10 in 1939. This is their older sister, Eva. She's 7 years older, so you can imagine how put out she was when the twins were born. She was too old for the Kindertransport, so this family friend, Mary, got her nursing training permit so that she got out a few weeks before Hans and Hannah. This is their mother, Trudy, and she was able to get a domestic visa. So that was what her friend got for her. Her English Jewish friend got her a domestic visa. And she came out just before, about 3 weeks before the war started. And this is my grandfather, Willie Korn, and he wasn't able to get out. And we think that's because he was too old to get a visa. He was 51, so he got stuck in Europe. And the family learnt later, my mother learnt later that in 1942 he was deported and murdered in Auschwitz. So let's look at Hannah's file first. So here's Hannah with her plaques. So the initial information is the sort of basic name, address. It's also got her, the address in Germany. So it's got religion, Jewish. She arrived on the 5th of July 1939. And then she went to start with, she stayed with her sister Eva, where she was doing the nursing. Then Mary and the West London Synagogue got her into a girls' boarding school in Folkestone. Then that was evacuated to Shrewsbury. And then when she was in sixth form, she went to a school in Shrewsbury, a different school, and so she had a different address. So you can see there's 4 different addresses over, and this is over a period of about 7 years. Children particularly, the refugee children moved around a lot. And World Jewish Relief has kept track of them using pen and ink or a manual typewriter, which I think is very telling. And one of the things that I thought was particularly interesting about these files is that it talked about welfare reports. So basically, World Jewish Relief were providing welfare reports to check on how the children were. So it wasn't just about where they were living, it was about their well-being. And this is November 1942. It says, girl seems perfectly satisfied with her surroundings. They also kept track of her immigration status. Here it says she wants to stay in England. They talk about instructions for registering on her 16th birthday. They get information about her father being deported, and they share that information with our grandmother, with her role. They're in touch of the whole family. They write mother responsible, and I think that must mean responsibility for the children. And once Hannah was 19 and things were stable and she was living with her mother at that point in London, then they handed over to our grandmother. So this is my uncle's file. He gets a bigger file because he was a wayward child, and he also had a number of addresses. He changed the school a couple of times, and sometimes it was because he didn't like the school, and sometimes it was because the school didn't like him because he was a bit of trouble. But he finished up at a school that worked really well for him called Farnham Grammar, where he thrived. Again, here you can see it says welfare report. This is November 1940, and they again sort of checking. It says health good. They're keeping track of his family, mentions his sister Hannah. They say he's still at school, well, and at this particular school, this is 1942 now, well and happy. And then it says, taken from letter sent by visitor. So what World Jewish Relief must have been doing was sending visitors to check on the children. They literally went and visited the children, and then they wrote a report for World Jewish Relief. And then it says he's moved to another school. And then it talks about, again, about his immigration status. And then there's a point where it says, the boy had mentioned in the letter to the welfare worker, to our welfare worker. So that's interesting. He's actually writing to his welfare worker at World Jewish Relief. But he finds that this is his Jewish studies, his correspondence lessons from the West London synagogue, not very interesting. And what do World Jewish Relief do? They transfer him to another correspondence teacher. And finally, this last entry is 1946, and he's moved to London, and they've heard from West London Synagogue that his London home is a very good one, and they have all the details about the job he has now. He's a junior clerk with a particular company in Great Portland Street. He's earning £2 a week. I think, again, that just shows really partly the persistence of World Jewish Relief. I mean, these files go beyond the war, and they go till the children become adults, before they sort of leave them. And as I say, they're also checking on their welfare. And then I wanted to show you that they grew up. So this is Hannah and Hunt, now Gerald. They must have been, we think, in their 70s then, at a birthday celebration, probably. So Hannah went on to be an English teacher, and she also taught English to refugees. And she married another German Jewish refugee, Peter Singer, and had me and my twin sister Helen, who's on this call. She died 5 years ago now, and she was 89. And Gerald had two careers. First he was an insurance broker, and then later he was a travel courier, a very popular travel courier, actually. And he died a few years before Hannah. He was 83 when he died. And they would have been really pleased that I'm using their story in this context, and in the context of moving on from what happened to them to what is happening now. Because I think if you think about, a charity, World Jewish Relief, it was set up in 1933. It kept contact with thousands, I think, of children during war, when there was no technology, and monitored their whereabouts and their welfare. And now, as we're going to hear more of from Lauren and from Janine, the Home Office can't even keep track of 200 children who are in hotels that are run by the Home Office. So I'm very proud to share my family story.
Thank you so much, Deborah. And I'm sure I'm not alone in saying how moving and powerful that story is, and how lucky we are to hear it from you. I'm going to move on now to Lauren, who's going to talk to us a bit more about what's happening today. Thanks, Lauren.
Hi, thank you, everyone. Deborah, that was incredible. And it's something that really resonates with me, because recently the organisation I work for has closed its doors, and we've had an ongoing conversation about what we do with young people's case files. And we've used your story, and you're going through these as an example of many years down the line, children may want to go back and look over their history. So the information you've just shared with us has actually really informed what we've done over the past few weeks to make sure that information is preserved, because it is so important for people to be able to look back over their history. So as introduced earlier, I'm an independent social worker. I've been working with unaccompanied asylum-seeking children for the past 6 years, and I have a particular focus on supporting children and young people who are at risk of trafficking and exploitation. My background is in work with local authorities, but for the past 3 years, I've been with Love 146, which is an international human rights organisation working to end child trafficking through survivor care and prevention education. I'm also a volunteer with Spresso Programme and their Young People's Project, which is doing a lot of really amazing work at the moment, supporting Albanian children and young people who are going through the asylum system, because, as I'll note later on, this is a particularly at-risk group. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on now and the background to how we got to where we are now, and sort of using my own social work background as a bit of a journey to get us there. So I noticed very early on in training and qualifying as a social worker that some groups of children were given less favourable treatment than others, and I felt very aware of the injustice of it all. After a decade of austerity, local authorities are stripped to the bone. They're providing the bare minimum to many children in care because they don't have the funding or the resources that they need. And I found that really frustrating. The lack of ability to really meet the needs of incredibly vulnerable young people was very frustrating for me. And I noticed this in particular for asylum seeking children. In my experience, were significantly more likely to be placed in unregulated semi-independent accommodation. So I was seeing children of 16 years old, some of them still school age in year 11, who were living in unregulated semi-independent accommodation on their own. These were kids who were getting up on their own every morning, ironing their own school uniforms and getting themselves to school because there was no adult there looking after them. And I found it really upsetting, which is part of the reason I left local authority social work. So what I found was that these children were treated less favourably. You would hear phrases like bed blocking used if you had unaccompanied asylum seeking children who were deeply traumatised and extremely vulnerable, but whose behaviour didn't present quite as chaotically or violently perhaps as a British born young person, for example, and they were taking up a bed in a children's home. They were described as bed blocking. We needed to get them out to independent accommodation so we could free up the bed. And I found it all quite distressing. So one of the things that is set up for situations like this, when local authorities have got too many children in their care, they're not able to cope, is a system called the National Transfer Scheme, which allocates the care of unaccompanied asylum seeking children to other local authorities so that those with ports of arrival, such as Kent, Portsmouth, Hillingdon, Croydon, they don't get completely overwhelmed. The system has always been slow and flawed, but in the summer of 2021, that system broke down almost entirely. And what we were then made aware of was that in response, the Home Office started putting children in hotels, and they would do this very, very quickly. They would take big groups of newly arrived children, dump them in hotels. They would give a local authority less than 24 hours notice. The local authority wouldn't have the resources or the capacity to take those children into its own care, so they would remain being accommodated by the Home Office in hotels. The entire children's rights sector came out against this very strongly, very quickly, because it was dangerous, it was neglectful, it was inappropriate, and it was unlawful. And I know Janine will go into the specifics of this a little bit more later on, but the way these children were being treated by the Home Office was unlawful. The location of a hotel here in Brighton, in my community, was made public really early on. People at Britain First started turning up, filming these children with those video cameras. What we were really worried about when the hotels were made public was that the children inside were extremely high risk of trafficking and exploitation, because people knew that these hotels were sites that were housing large numbers of children with no real oversight, with no one legally responsible for them. And we warned of the risks, and we were ignored by the Home Office. And we were worried about a two-pronged level of risk to these children. One was the pre-existing risk to children who may have been trafficked into the UK. What commonly happens when children are trafficked into the UK is they have debt bonds held over them. And so those children are extremely high risk of going missing and trying to go to their traffickers because they're worried about what will happen to themselves and their families if they don't. The other level of concern was for children who weren't trafficked into the UK, but were living in these really neglectful conditions in the hotels, were really fearful of what was going to happen to them, and who were then able to be groomed for exploitation by people who would say to them, you don't want to be in the hotel, you don't want to take a gamble on this system, come with me, I know someone who can get you work and a place to stay. And those children were at really, really high risk. So we warned, the Home Office ignored us, and all of our fears were then confirmed. We started seeing reports fairly quickly of lots of children going missing. And then earlier this year, it was revealed that hundreds of children have gone missing, and many of them have never been seen again. And to Deborah's point that I think is really, really interesting around how so many children back when they arrived on the Kindertransport were able to be kept track of in the middle of a war, a war situation, and yet the Home Office now can't keep track of these children. I think partly the reason for that is because we have reached a point where the Home Office is actually one of the things these children are running away from. So World Jewish Relief was protecting these children. The Home Office is not. The Home Office is one of the things they are fleeing, and that's why the Home Office isn't able to keep track of them. I want to highlight the difference between trafficking and smuggling, because this has been conflated a lot recently, and it's really, really important. You'll hear people like Grant Shapps saying people who are willingly trafficked into this country shouldn't be afforded protection. You can't be willingly trafficked. There is no such thing as a person who is willingly trafficked. Trafficking is a very serious crime, which doesn't affect the vast majority of people who cross the channel. The vast majority of channel crossings are smuggled, people who have been able to pay someone to move them across a border. That is a transaction which is ostensibly for the benefit of the person being moved. It is often rife with violence and abuse, but it is ostensibly for the benefit of the person being moved, and it is a transaction that ends when they reach their point of arrival. Trafficking is a system of exploitation in which a person is moved and exploited for the benefit of someone else. So the easiest way that I've often heard it described is smuggling is when you are the customer, trafficking is when you are the product. You are the thing that is being bought and sold. And so most of the people crossing the channel are not. Only 6% of small boat arrivals were actually referred into the national referral mechanism for identifying victims of trafficking, but over 80% of those received a positive reasonable grounds decision. So we see the Home Office claiming that the modern slavery system is being gamed, but actually the Home Office itself is the one making the majority of these referrals and is the one identifying the majority of these people as being at risk. So there's no evidence base for what the Home Office is claiming in terms of modern slavery referrals. We are particularly concerned about Albanian and Vietnamese children entering the UK. They are two of the most at-risk groups. They are often deceived with false offers of education, work, and a better life, but they are brutally exploited once they arrive in this country. And I'm really conscious of the line the government pulled on the children missing from hotels, which was to minimise the level of concern. They kind of said, well, the children are all 16, 17 years old. They're not young children, they're all male, and 88% of them are Albanian. To me, 88% of those children going missing being Albanian is a huge cause for concern. Albanian children are at uniquely high risk of criminal exploitation, and they are in desperate need of protection. At both Love 146 and Expressa, we see the devastation that is wrought on the children who are brought over and exploited by these criminals. So what these children experience on arrival adds to their level of vulnerability, and I'm particularly concerned about age assessments. We've seen huge numbers of children entering the UK who have been age assessed on arrival, and this is part of a government drive to kind of foster suspicion of asylum seekers and divide communities. We don't want to see children as vulnerable. We want to stoke this narrative that they're secretly all adults. So, you'll hear an awful lot of talk of, well, they're all coming in with beards. Lots of people have got beards from a really young age. My husband had a beard in his bar mitzvah photos at 13. I've worked with Kurdish boys who have full beards. It's not an indicator of a person's age. But what the Home Office has done is incorrectly age assessed huge numbers of children as adults, put them into adult asylum accommodation. And I've seen cases of children who were incorrectly age assessed, put in adult hotels, and who were directly trafficked as a result of that decision making. The lack of secure immigration status is a huge risk factor for children. So the Home Office push to refuse asylum claims, refuse NRM status has been really, really problematic, because children need security and they need to know they are not going to be returned to the very place that they were trafficked from, because we know that traffickers use threats to keep children under control around what will happen to them once they're sent home. So children having that fear of being sent home is a huge, huge risk factor. The Home Office hostile environment policy has always enabled exploitation to flourish, because traffickers use the immigration system against victims. They'll say, come forward about what's happened to you, you will be arrested and you'll be deported. But that threat now is stronger than ever. Children are absolutely terrified of being sent to Rwanda or sent back to Albania or sent anywhere else in the world. And the new bill in particular is so shocking and so concerning that I don't think it's possible to overstate the level of devastation this will bring. I think Today in Parliament, Robert Jenrick said something that I think really sums up the situation. Speaking about people smugglers, he said, "They are some of the most evil, most pernicious people in society. You have to match them. You cannot behave in a way that is weak and naive." So Robert Jenrick, the immigration minister, stood up in Parliament today and admitted that the government's aim right now is to become as cruel and pernicious as human traffickers, and they are aiming to treat children just as badly. The implications of this bill are catastrophic for children and for child protection. It allows for the detention and the removal of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. It removes access to leave-in care support for children once they turn 18. There's been a lot of talk of whether or not this bill complies with domestic and international human rights law. I think more scrutiny needs to be given to whether or not this bill is compatible with domestic child protection legislation, because in my view, it isn't. And I hope Janine can possibly give a more kind of legal view on that than me, but as far as I'm concerned, this bill is not compatible with child protection legislation. All children approaching 18 have a right under the Children Act of 1989 to be supported into adulthood safely. This bill removes that safeguard, and I think what we're going to see are huge numbers of 17-year-old children going missing as a result of their fear of what's going to happen to them once they turn 18. So what we need right now is an immediate end to the accommodation of children by the Home Office on hotels. We need to take all decisions relating to the care of children away from the Home Office. They've got no remit to be doing this. The National Transfer Scheme, all decisions about the care of children need to be put with the Department for Education where they belong, alongside any other child that's got a right to protection in this country. We really need to stand up and stop the scapegoating of Albanians. Yes, 88% of those children who've gone missing are Albanian. The attacks on that one small community have been used as a stalking horse to attack modern slavery protections more generally, and have led to an enormous increase in hostility towards an incredibly vulnerable community. And it has terrified children and young people, and has led to some of them making really risky choices that they wouldn't have done if they had felt safer. When we allow one group to be demonized in this way, it is a slippery slope that leads directly to the erosion of protections for everyone. So we really must make sure we stand in solidarity with marginalised communities. Finally, the government claims that this bill is needed to stop the traffickers. The reality right now is that no one is doing more to enable human trafficking than our government. We must fight this bill at every turn. Write to your MPs, urge them to fight against the bill, do everything they can to stop the removal, in particular, of safeguards for children. We need to open safe routes so that children and young people don't have to make dangerous crossings and fall into the hands of exploiters. Our government talks about our proud record of welcoming refugees, but we need to learn the lessons of the Kindertransport, because as things stand, we have got no claim to being a country that protects human rights and welcomes those in need.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for what I'm sure we can all agree was both an incredibly powerful and deeply, deeply informative presentation of what's happening on the ground today. I can only imagine the kinds of interactions that you're having with children and cases at the moment, and it's incredibly powerful to hear how this hostile environment that I think can seem quite abstract to a lot of people actually interacts with people's daily lives and children's daily lives. Finally, and certainly not least, we have Janine Walker from the Good Law Project, who is going to talk to us a bit more about what's happening to challenge this from a legal perspective.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Deborah and Lauren. I was incredibly moved by your presentation, Deborah. It's a real honour to see that. And Lauren, I just really couldn't agree with you more. And it's really really powerful to hear, from somebody who's been working directly with children. So I'll talk a little bit more about, yes, the legal challenges that are being brought to this situation. So Good Law Project is working with Article 39, which is a small independent charity which fights for the rights of children living in state and privately run institutions in England. Good Law Project is funding and campaigning and supporting the legal team on sort of two key challenges, one in the family courts and one potentially against the Home Office and the Secretary of State for Education, which really seeks to directly attack and challenge this Home Office practice of housing children in hotels, which, as Lauren said, is incredibly risky, entirely inappropriate, and and completely wrong. Before I talk more about the legal challenges, I thought I'd just like to take a second and just comment that in my 15 years of working as an asylum lawyer, representing unaccompanied asylum seeking children, what we're seeing now, what we've seen in the last couple of years is completely unprecedented. When I started working in the field, and for many years, children were accommodated and supported by local authorities under the Children Act. If they were younger, they were in foster care. If they were older, they were in supported accommodation. The system was obviously not perfect. There were a lot of problems, and it was very difficult for children to go through the asylum system. Support was perhaps sometimes, inadequate. There were issues with age assessments, but it was absolutely nothing like what we are seeing today. And certainly the Home Office was not responsible and was not accommodating children in hotels. So this is a seismic change, and it's completely unprecedented. Something else that's changed is that for all those years, almost every child I represented had arrived in the UK hidden on a lorry. And obviously that wasn't a good thing, but it also wasn't something that was particularly remarked upon. That was just the way that things that people arrived in the UK, mostly because there are very, very few, if any, other ways for people to arrive safely with a visa to come to the UK to seek asylum. There is no visa to come to the UK to seek asylum. In the past, I had one or two clients who arrived on a so-called safe route. There was a system for a few years called the DUB system, on which children were transferred from a couple of European countries to the UK. That has ended. There was also for a time the Dublin regulation that allowed unaccompanied children to join family in the UK, also a safe route between countries. That ended with Brexit. And there were also sometimes children were able to join family under the refugee family reunion rules, but they were always a minority. Most people arrived hidden on lorries. So what we're seeing now is completely unprecedented in different ways. And just looking at the bigger picture as well, it isn't just the situation for children that's so unprecedented. It's the situation for children has to be seen as part of this much wider government agenda, which is to punish all refugees who arrive irregularly, or rather sort of spontaneously, and to try to deter them from coming to the UK. And this can be seen in a range of measures, including housing adult asylum seekers in unsuitable places like former barracks, rather than, as used to happen before a few years ago, in the community, or the removal plan to Rwanda, or the provisions in the Nationality and Borders Act that came into force last year, which creates a two-tier system of refugee protection, whereby people who arrive irregularly are only granted a temporary stay, or the new bill that's going through Parliament now. So that's the kind of wider context beyond children. But to come back to the situation with children in the hotels, and to actually talk about what I'm here to talk about, the legal challenges that we're bringing. So one involves a really novel kind of application, which is an application to the family courts. It's the one that was covered in the Guardian article that Esther mentioned today. That was an article that followed the hearing in our case on Friday last week. And in this case, Article 39 is asking the family court essentially to step in and to make this particular group of missing children. It has to be a specific group. So that's why the application at this stage is only relating to this group of children who are missing from the hotel in Brighton and Hove, to make them wards of the court. This hasn't been used in this context before, but this is because this situation is completely unprecedented, and it's basically saying to the court, nobody is caring for these children. The Home Office certainly isn't. the local authority should be, but also isn't. They need to be made wards of the court. That would give the court the power to appoint children's guardians who could assist in locating the children and supporting their welfare. So there is going to be another hearing in that case later on in April. But this first step has been hugely positive. So the Home Office have been ordered to disclose to the court the identities of these children, and that's obviously a really good first step to try to locate them and bring them within the protection of the court. Yes, there was something more on that, but it's escaped me, so perhaps I'll come back to it. Yes, no, hugely positive. We weren't even sure that the court would sort of entertain this application in a sense, because it's so novel. So it's really, really good that they are. Yeah. The second case is a potential judicial review challenge. So that is basically asking the High Court to review this practice of the Home Office of putting children in hotels and to find that it's unlawful. This has been going on a while, and yes, why is this case being brought now? It could have, now the situation that the whistleblowers report from January has shown that the problems of children going missing are so widespread that really something has to be done about it. Obviously, it's hard to put together a legal challenge like this and to raise the funds also to be able to do so. So I think that's the only reason why it's sort of happening now and hasn't before. Not that the situation before didn't deserve it. It's just that cases like this are hard to get off the ground in a sense. And what we're arguing in that case is that the Home Office doesn't have the power to do what they're doing. The law simply doesn't allow it. And also that it's clear that what they're doing is not in the children's best interests, and that there's a clear absence of care, protection and support, and that it's a breach of human rights as well. The Home Office responded. So this case hasn't been started in court yet. We're at the so-called pre-action stage where there's a letter to the Home Office and to the Secretary of State for Education saying this is why we think it's unlawful. Then they provide a response, and then and then the case will hopefully, if it does start in court, will happen soon. And the Home Office have basically said they deny any wrongdoing. They say the law does allow them to do this. They say that the care that the children are receiving is okay, good enough, which is just shocking. And in fact, they sort of say that the children would be in a worse situation if they didn't step in, which is also quite shocking. But that's where we are. So we're meeting with a legal team tomorrow and sort of to decide on next steps and things. So just to conclude, yes, I mean, what are we seeing happening? We're seeing a real anti-refugee and human rights agenda from this government, scapegoating, as Lauren said, and this attempt to deter people from coming. There's a lot of manipulation for political gains. It is not the case that there is a crisis. None of this is in any way necessary. The government sometimes try to dress it up as doing something favourable to stop people taking dangerous journeys. That is really not, there's nothing favourable about what they're doing. They're not helping people at all. And they are really pushing the limits of what they can get away with in legal terms. They themselves have been unable to say that the current bill that's going through Parliament is human rights compatible. It clearly isn't. The UNHCR has spoken out incredibly strongly, unusually strongly, saying that these provisions are against the Refugee Convention, and there have been, so many people have said it's against human rights legislation as well. In terms of what can be done about it, because I saw that was in sort of part of the purpose of the talk as well, I think so many things can and are being done about it. Litigation is obviously only one small part of that. The practical support, advocacy, more direct action, supporting through donations, but also just coming together and sort of maintaining hope in very dark times is very important as well. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Janine, for kind of tying together so much of what's already being said. and for giving us a kind of also something actionable that we can do, which is to support the legal challenge that you are bringing alongside Article 39. And also, just before I move on to the kind of Q&A portion of the evening, just a massive thank you to all of our wonderful panelists who've spoken, to Deborah for sharing an incredibly intimate and personal story and linking it to so movingly to what's happened today, and to Lauren for really bringing us into focus on what's actually happening on the ground and the stories of individual people whose lives kind of in great swathes are really being affected by this. And again, obviously to Janine for giving us that really, really helpful kind of legal infrastructure that some of us often very much struggle to understand, definitely including myself. So yeah, the Q&A function is open. We've already got some wonderful questions coming through. And I'm going to start, Mia's very helpfully kind of brought in our first question, which I believe is for Deborah, although actually upon reading this again, I think it may also be helpful, helpful for Lauren to come in too. So let me just read this properly. Let me just go into the Q&A. 1 minute. Okay. So it says, yeah, so it's from Simon, who says, thank you, Deborah, for sharing this most moving story of your family, a tragedy that your grandfather was deported from France, where he presumably traveled for safety. My experience of looking at the Basque children files tells me that the files on children in exceptional circumstances, for example, those who were ill with TB and those who died by accident or other causes, may have larger files. What do the exceptional files of World Jewish Relief tell us about the humanity of World Jewish Relief and their kind of approach to what are deemed here naughty or out of control children? I would imagine there's probably I imagine Lauren also has some thoughts here on this with a broader kind of response to social work, but I don't know if Deborah, you wanted to come in briefly to respond. You're on mute, Deborah.
Yes, thank you, Simon. I think it's, yeah, you'll notice that Simon talks about the Basque children, and I think that's a really interesting comparison as well. Lots of children who came here because of the civil war in Spain, so a couple of years before the Kindertransport. I think one of the things that I'm very aware of in listening to the other speakers is that the Kindertransport was a charity-led setup. The local authorities, the government, were not looking after these children, however badly. The World Jewish Relief and a number of other charities had to persuade the government to allow children in by doing a sort of visa waiver so that they could get group visas. You've heard in the film, my mother, Hannah, talks about they only just got the tickets in time. They actually got them at 10 o'clock the night before they had to travel. And I think, so I think one of the things that's fascinating is that, you know, that it was the charities, it was groups, not just Jewish charities, but the Quakers particularly, and other groups who looked after the children and you know, to be honest, you know, some had a better experience than others. And I think I can't sort of speak for all the files because basically all the files are in the hands, you know, World Jewish Relief could speak for them, but basically they're now in the hands of individuals. And I have seen there's another film as well as my mother's film, although she's in both, where these two other sets of kinder are getting their files. And one is twins who came here at the age of 6 and had all their things had been stolen. And in the files, it talks about what clothes they'd been given. They'd been given each 2 sets of shirts and 2 sets of shorts and 2 sets of jumpers. And the other one where this man is presented with his file, and he was one of the boys. So he came, having been in concentration camp, he came to this country as part of the bringing over children who'd been in the camps that they were looked after in Windermere. And his file, he thought it was bad with my mother's and uncle's, the number of addresses. There must have been like 12 different addresses at least over the course of the same number of years. And his son is with him, so his son's probably my sort of age with his elderly father. And the son says, yeah, whenever we drive around London, Dad's always going, oh, I live there, oh, I live there, oh, I live there. And they hadn't believed him, but now they could see it in writing. So I don't know is the answer to, you know, the particularly difficult and out of control children. I think clearly the children, I mean, as you'll know from my mother's story, you know, she was with her mother and her brother and her sister, whereas a lot of children came maybe with brothers and sisters, but never saw their parents again. So the amount of trauma that there was, you know, probably not completely recognised at that time is definitely another factor.
Lauren, if you wanted to come in on the other part, yeah, you're good. I'll let you go.
Yeah, no, I have a lot of thoughts around case recording actually, and it's one of the issues actually with the children who are missing from Home Office hotels, because any child that's in the care of a local authority at the moment has a case file that is held by the local authority, and they're generally held for 75 years. So at any point in that person's life, they can go back to their local authority and ask for a copy of their case file. The children that are in the hotels at the moment, it's not clear what records are being kept about them. So who is recording, you know, how they're settling in, what they're eating every day, what clothes they're being given, the kind of really powerful details that Deborah has been able to share. Who holds that information about these children in the hotels? And as far as I can tell, it's no one. The Home Office doesn't have a system set up for case recording around, you know, the day-to-day care of children. That's what local authorities have got. So there is a real issue here around where is the case file, where is the history of these children. As a note on case recording in general, as a social worker, I'm really conscious of how I record information about people, precisely because of situations like this. Many years down the line, someone could look back over their case file. And it's interesting, you mentioned the kind of the difficult, the out of control children. In my view, every child has got something positive that can be said about them, regardless of how out of control, regardless of how difficult, you know, missing. Many of the children I work with are criminally exploited. They're into all sorts of activities that they've been forced into that you wouldn't want them involved in. And a lot of people tend to see them only for the risk, only for the bad things. And I think what Deborah's story really powerfully highlights is just how important it is to record what you're seeing of the humanity of the people you're looking after. So in everything I write, regardless of if I'm writing, I'm very concerned that this young person is involved in drug dealing, that they are being criminally exploited, that there's this level of risk, that this terrible thing is happening, I always make a point of writing about how it affects them as a person, how they interact as a person, and what are their good qualities, what are the things I notice about them. So yes, this person's being criminally exploited. He's also a really lovely young man with a really wonderful sense of humor who can connect really well with people. He's just not in a position to be able to do so right now. So I don't have an answer regarding, you know, the size of the case files and World Jewish Relief holding them, but I have a lot of thoughts on case recording in general and how vital it is for people's preservation of their history.
I don't know whether I know we have other questions, but I don't know if people would be, whilst we're on case files, interested in hearing a sort of lawyer's perspective. I've spent many hours going through Home Office files that people can ask for through it's called a subject access request under the Freedom of Information Act, and particularly and I don't know whether they will have many records of children in hotels, and probably, you know, certainly not to the standard that the local authority would, as Lauren said. In relation to people who the Home Office have detained, then often the Home Office own records provided the evidence that established that people were detained unlawfully by the Home Office. So it was the Home Office own records that would support the cases that we were bringing against the Home Office, claiming damages in some cases about the Home Office's wrongdoing. So that says it all, really.
Thank you so much, all of you. I'm just kind of grouping them together as we've had kind of like a few good answers on kind of how they were able to maintain the files and what that kind of looks like. I'm gonna maybe take on a couple of questions from another angle. So we've got a really interesting question from Amy here, who says, we seem to be at a crossroads with Kindertransport memory. While we are more aware of the complexities of this history, there seems to be a disconnect at a governmental and political level. I wonder what you think the future could look like. Will we really take on these lessons? And what are the most important lessons that we need to respond to now? And any of you are welcome to come in here. Go on, Deborah. You're on mute, remember.
So, hi, Amy. So Amy is an absolute expert, if it's the right Amy Williams, on Kindertransport. She's an academic and she writes a lot about this. And she actually interviewed my mother for her research, for her PhD, I think. And so she will know much better than I do that the Kindertransport narrative is complex, because although the UK talks about, and the Home Office will always put this, you'll see it in every time they've given an answer about refugees, it's always about we have a proud history of saving refugees. And the fact is, they did put in this, you know, helped a bit with the immigration status of the children that the Jewish charities brought over. But what they didn't do was bring over their parents. And that's why, you know, so many children lost their parents. So this whole narrative that is true, that basically people put their children on the trains to get them to safety, and then, you know, were murdered in concentration camps, and the children never saw them again. So I always feel quite mixed about this narrative about how wonderful the UK is. On the other hand, sometimes it's quite nice to be able to use it against the government and saying, you know, we're supposed to be good about this, we're supposed to be a welcoming society, so why aren't we doing this? I think at the moment, I think working on, so I'm working on focusing on children's cases is, again, it's a two-edged sword. So on one level, it's an absolute way of getting people's sympathy and concern because they're children. On the other hand, we want that to spread. It's about adults as well. I used to work for Asylum Aid running the Women's Project, and the idea was, you know, we fought for the rights. With women seeking asylum, we fought for their rights, and then we'd hope that that would then sort of spread a bit, so that, you know, the whole asylum system could be improved for people generally. And in terms of the future, I don't think I can even start to tell you what I think of the current government's ideas about refugees, so I won't.
Okay, I will I've got a couple of questions here that I think I'm sure like Lauren would be able to kind of come in on that I think would be very helpful for our audience. I've got one here that's quite a practical question from someone anonymous, I think, which says, as a medical professional who often works with unaccompanied minors, what can I do to help them or safeguard them if they're in unsuitable accommodation? We can submit safeguarding, but only those deemed most at risk get properly followed up on or moved to more supportive accommodation.
Unfortunately, you're really limited in what you can do. You can raise safeguarding referrals directly with the local authority. The only thing you can really do is be persistent. I think the main lesson I have learned over the last 6 years of social work with unaccompanied children is persistence is all you've really got. You have to just keep trying. Don't give up on things. When it comes to the care of children, the thing that is most likely to get results is becoming a massive pain in the arse. Get to the point where people are so sick of hearing from you, they have no choice but to take action, because otherwise they're just going to keep hearing from you day in, day out. So be persistent, put in those safeguarding referrals, be really evidence-based. I've got mixed feelings around evidence-based social work. I think we rely too strongly on hard objective evidence when actually there's an awful lot to be said for the evidence in human relationships and that kind of thing. But as a medical professional, be as evidence-based as you possibly can. Say directly what it is you're seeing, how is it putting these children at risk, what do they need to be safe, and just keep on and on and on and on, and don't give up.
I'm just going to add one more question that I think would be quite straightforward, which is, or maybe not, I'm not sure. Are police aware of the missing children for when they stop and search, or if they're arrested for criminal activity? Like how, I suppose the question here is like, how much awareness do the police have of this issue? And like, I guess they're, you know, in their collaboration with the Home Office and so on.
That is not a straightforward answer.
No, not at all. I realised as I was speaking, I was like, I don't know why I said that.
The police often are aware. So if a child has been reported missing and is encountered by the police, when the police check their database, they will see that that is a missing child. What the police then do with that information differs wildly from officer to officer, force to force, situation to situation. You might have a missing child who's been identified as really high risk of trafficking, who's picked up by police, arrested. The police see their record and say, okay, we're going to de-arrest, we're going to safeguard. You might have another child, exact same concerns, where the police go, no, he's been found with cocaine on him, we're arresting him anyway. It's really, really inconsistent, and the police in general do not respond well to criminally exploited children and young people. They have a very prosecute first, safeguard later approach that is really deeply problematic, and is problematic for many of these children who are going to be found being criminally exploited.
Certainly not simple in any like by any means. I don't know if Janine, you wanted to come in. I know you've got some. No, that's all good. Okay, just checking. I'm going to just do one more question. I know it's so amazing to see so many people bringing in their thoughts, but there is a question that I think would be kind of help us to tie everything together, which is as well as legal challenges against unlawful practical actions, where is the best place for challenges to underlying ideologies and discriminatory belief systems? A very small question to end, that are harmful to all society if allowed to be normalized. This includes the effective grooming, as this person describes, of the population against migrants through rhetoric, to then be reflected back to the UK population as what we want, in quotation marks. Would anyone like to come in first?
I'm happy to have a stab at that. I mean, that's not, I read a title recently, Litigation Will Not Bring About the Revolution, or something, a title of a forthcoming book. And I thought that that's so true. I'm a lawyer and I absolutely agree with that. And I think the space for the kind of things that the person asking this question is talking about is in difficult conversations, maybe difficult ones with people who have different ideas to us about things. So conversations outside of our sort of echo chambers and things, and the government is manipulating migration as a political issue, and that's been done before, and that needs to change. And it connects with much bigger issues, as you say, about society and economy and things like that. And so a different sphere entirely.
I'm also going to use my privileges to come in and also say that I think part of what we do to challenge those underlying beliefs is events like this, where we remind people of the ultimate consequences of a system that discriminates so deeply and makes life so difficult for ordinary people just trying to move on and live their lives. I think a huge amount of that is about how we message these questions. When it comes to, obviously, as Janine mentioned, there are so many different kind of questions here in terms of class and race and so on that bring us to the kind of place that we're in today. And I can see Isabel's also asked about kind of sharing ideas of how we can protect these children together. I think one thing is to basically show people what the consequences of this are, and stories are an amazing way to do that. And I'm sure Lauren has a lot of thoughts on that too. And I'll go over to Deborah because I think she also had some thoughts.
So I was going to say that I think when we as you can probably imagine, at Renica Sound, we talk a lot about messaging, and one of the things that seems to be a common understanding is that you've got you've got a whole spectrum. So you've got what seems at the moment like quite a lot of the government on one end, whose views, and of the public, whose views are not going to be changed. Others who are already on our side, who probably is everybody in this room, in this webinar, and then you've got the middle, who are hopefully persuadable. And so that's one of the systems that is used, really, that we use in terms of who we target. The other thing that I think that we focus on, and that I think it was Lauren mentioned as well, is around this issue of marginalised groups. And if you're from a minority, members are from the Jewish community, then you recognise the need to support other marginalised groups. So the fact that we work on issues to do with asylum, whether it's generally, or it's detention, or it's children, or it's women. We work with the Gypsy Remnant Traveller community, etc., etc. And I think that's probably true for lots of people. That's not just, you know, just for the Jewish community to do. And I think that helps people to recognise that, okay, you know, one group of people who are being marginalised or being discriminated against, it says at the moment, just because we're not part of that group doesn't mean we won't be fighting on their side.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, very much echoing what Lauren was saying too about the fact this is a slippery slope, and governments that are towards draconian policies will eventually turn them on their own citizens. And I think we're going to close the question portion for now, as we're already running over. Thank you so much for all these incredible questions that we've had. And if you do have any kind of pressing questions, you're welcome to email me. And if you'd like to be put in touch with any of the panelists with their permission, I will be able to share those details with you if you email me first. And just to kind of close out, just a couple of things. First of all, obviously, a huge thank you to our three speakers who shared a kind of real fount of knowledge with us, from kind of this historical and deeply personal exploration of the experience of migrant children in the 20th century to their stories today, and the kind of legal and political infrastructure that's making this extremely difficult for them, and the possibilities for challenging that through strategic litigation, as explored by Janine. So kind of in lieu of that, please do donate to the Good Law Project's crowdfunder. That's the only way that they can make these novel legal challenges that Janine described. And I believe Mia is sharing that in the chat as we speak. So do donate to that. Also make sure to support Renee Kassan in our work. We are only able to do kind of like run these kinds of events through kind of trusts and donations. So please do, you can find the details to support us via our website. More broadly, our campaign for a compassionate approach to migration continues, in particular our flagship campaigns against immigration detention. If there are kind of Jewish members here who are attending a Seder over Passover, you can access our supplement to the Haggadah, to the service. It's called Opening the Door to Elijah, and it's got a range of activities and discussion questions you can engage with through the lens of Passover, made by our wonderful intern, Alfie. And it will allow you kind of a better understanding of these issues. You can, bring them to your uncle that you're not sure whether or not he's going to agree, but you're going to bring him the issue, and you're going to make him care. So please, and if you'd like to get involved further in any of our campaigns, you can visit our website, which is www.reneekassan.org, or email me. And yes, again, basically just a final thank you to everyone for coming, for being involved. You can access, Mia's just posted our email address and our Haggadah supplement in the chat. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And thank you so much for our wonderful panelists for sharing your insights, thoughts, and knowledge. And with that, I will close out and say goodbye.